Once again, as we will explore in a little more detail in this hour, once again, Donald Trump is not just saying horribly irresponsible things regarding an American minority. He is setting the tone for his party, and for his party's debate, both its formal debates and its internal discussions. He issued a statement December 7th calling for, as you know, a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. In so doing, he quoted a erroneous and misleading quote unquote survey by an organization led by a noted fraud and Islamophobe named Frank Gaffney, arguing that 25% of those polled among Muslims agree that violence against Americans here in the United States is justified as part of the global jihad. That, as it is important to note every week, is utterly and completely false. That poll has been absolutely discredited. That group has been extremely discredited. And more importantly, as the New York Times points out, research clearly shows that Muslim Americans are less likely to endorse violence than are members of other religious groups. Specifically, Muslim Americans are less likely to endorse violence against civilians than members of other religious groups. What's more, the evidence, as the New York Times reported, shows that what they call a non-trivial minority of Americans of all faiths and backgrounds is willing to endorse the sorts of violence that, and then I'll just use my own words, that Trump accuses Muslims of supporting. In fact, the data shows that 27% of Americans, more than one in four, endorsed violence against the government under some circumstances in a 1998 Pew poll, not Muslims, but Americans in general. More recently, surveys conducted by Monmouth College indicate that support for anti-government violence extends for millions of Americans to acts such as sending threats to politicians, throwing bricks through windows of the worst politicians, and fixing some of the problems citizens have with government, and I quote, with a few well-aimed bullets. Now, the fact is that these views are much more commonly held on the right than by Muslims. This is not my opinion. This is polling data showing that. And it is quite convenient for many that the horror in San Bernardino caused so many people to forget the horror the previous week in Colorado caused by a far right religious extremist of the Christian faith. So, once again, we cannot tar any minority with the views of a few. We cannot tar the American people with the views of a small minority of Americans. And we certainly must not support the kind of bias that was reflected by Mr. Trump, but also reflected back at him by other GOP candidates. Now, we also hear the hate mongers on the right and in the media routinely telling us, well, why don't Muslims and Muslim leaders denounce the Islamic State? Well, they keep doing that over and over, just as they have repeatedly denounced Al Qaeda and terrorism in general for 15 years. But we don't hear much about that either. Now, let me give you a few examples of what I mean. Fox and Friends said, quote unquote, we aren't hearing much, unquote, condemnation of ISIS from Muslim groups. In fact, many such groups have condemned. We'll get to that in a second. Sean Hannity said, quote unquote, where are the Muslim leaders speaking out against the Islamic State? Laura Ingraham on ABC News said, we're not hearing enough, quote, if any, condemnation of the Islamic State from the Muslim community. Now, in fact, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation said the Islamic State has nothing to do with Islam. Al-Azhar, the powerful religious institution in Egypt, said the Islamic State is corrupt and a danger to Islam. And by the way, I'm getting this from Media Matters. Arab League strongly denounced the crimes against humanity of ISIS. Turkey's top cleric denounced them. The Council on American Islamic Relations has repeatedly condemned the Islamic State. The Muslim Council of Great Britain has done the same. So has the Islamic Society of North America, 100 Sunni and Shiite imams in the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia's highest religious authority, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and on and on and on. And just last week, 70,000 Muslim religious authorities in India issued a joint fatwa condemning extremism. So why do we keep hearing this sort of thing? So not only do we have leaders like Donald Trump and the other many of the other Republican candidates being gravely irresponsible, to their credit, a few Republicans have stood up and resisted that, but many have not. But we also see a news blackout on these very, very important condemnations by Muslim authorities. Now, from the sublimely frightening to perhaps the ridiculous, but also the important in its own way. Nicki Minaj. Nicki Minaj, the rapper and singer, is scheduled this weekend, perhaps even as this show broadcasts, to bring her talents to the Angolan capital of Luanda, where she will appear at a special Christmas festival sponsored by Unitel, the telecommunications company which is controlled by Angola's dictator and his family. What should we do when cultural icons appear before dictators? Now, regular listeners know that I've been very complimentary of Nicki Minaj's talents at times and of her outspoken feminist views. But what should we do? Shouldn't we be condemning that sort of coddling dictators for money? She's not the only one. Mariah Carey was paid $1 million to perform in Angola at a different holiday party for the dictatorship there. She's promised never to perform for dictators again, Mariah Carey, after singing for Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. One of the reasons, perhaps, it was a PR scandal for her. Shouldn't it be a PR scandal for anybody to sing for dictators? Shouldn't they be condemned for lobbying for dictators, for covering up the horrific crimes of dictators, or for doing business on a corporate level for dictators? I think it should be. I'll bet you do too. And I think we should start naming and shaming the people who coddle dictators for money.